Have you ever wondered why Africa, this most ancient landmass where humans have lived the longest, with extraordinary wealth in oil and diamonds and gold, is one of the least developed parts of the world today? To understand this extraordinary paradox, we have to look at the character of the continent, because it impacts not only how we understand the continent of Africa, but how we will understand its people and the art they make. To begin with, let's look at the shape of the continent. It's quite large, over 3 times the size of the continental United States, and it has within it an extraordinarily large population, 1.216 billion people, which makes it slightly smaller than China and India, but enormously larger than North America. And if we look at the population distribution in Africa, as you can see on the right, we see that the people are scattered across the continent in pockets, divided across from large wastelands that are largely uninhabited. And this sort of isolation is what keeps Africa from being able to develop a kind of common, unified goals and ambitions. And this is one that has plagued the continent since its very beginning. The history of Africa, as we look back to its very beginnings, when all land mass was a single form called Pangea, Africa was sort of at the center of that land mass. And as the other continents split out and moved in different directions, Africa largely stayed where it was. And because of its stability, it became the home to all this extraordinary mineral wealth that remains deep underground. But the problem of extracting that and the problem of getting access to that is only part of the puzzle of why Africa remains so poor today. It largely has to do with the character of the continent, with this high central plateau, where rivers that flow outward toward the coast are interrupted by these cataracts that are impassable. So you can navigate a river by boat only so far into the interior before you're stopped by these large waterfalls. So this high central plateau meant that for many, many centuries, civilizations were not able to really easily access the interior from the coast. It wasn't until the invention of the steam engine, when people were able to make railroads that cover over the cataracts into the interior of Africa, that there was significant trade with the interior. Another important hindrance to the development of Africa has been the fact that there are no natural harbors. The shape of Africa is a very dramatic and easily recognizable shape. But if you'll notice that it is rather smoothly defined compared to the sort of broken and convoluted contours of Europe or even parts of the United States, where there are numerous harbors where boats can find safe harbor and be able to move from along the coast slowly as they're developing their trade networks. In this case here, boats could not navigate the waters around the perimeter of the continent. So we can't have trade into the interior, and it's difficult to have trade along its coasts. Another problem with the continent is the banding nature of its climate regions. In the very center of the continent, we have the tropical rainforest climate, which is where you find the sort of lush rainforests, which are responsible for the sort of thick vegetation and small animals that thrive in these kinds of environments, in huge biodiversity, but also a great deal of diseases are born in this hot, humid climate. Surrounding the tropical rainforest is the Sahel or savanna climate. And there you can see a kind of dry grasslands that have home to the large fauna, the rhino, the giraffe, the zebra, and these are the creatures that sort of inhabit much of the central portions of Africa. On the desert climate of the central region, and here you can see where the people of Africa are largely isolated from the interior to the northern and southern regions by these vast impenetrable deserts, the Sahara in the north and the Gobi in the south. There is also the most human supporting region is in the far north and the far south. These are the Mediterranean climates. They're most similar to the kinds of climates you find in around other parts of the Mediterranean, such as Italy and Spain and the Middle East. And way down in the south, South African region is also very suitable for human habitation. But because these two regions are so far divided, none of the people who lived in one area could move or migrate easily or use the technology gained in one area in the other. So human beings in Africa are largely isolated and deal with an enormous variety of climate changes. The other region to mention is the highland climate, which you find here in Ethiopia and in parts of this region, this ancient region there, where the origins of special plants such as coffee and teff can be found. Early humans probably developed in South Africa some 35 million years ago as Egyptopithecus, a creature that would eventually come out of the trees and begin to walk along the savanna and the Sahel and in these grasslands and begin to look out over the grasslands, needed to stand up. And as they adopted more and more a standing posture, their upper body respiratory began to change and they were able to make a greater range of sounds. And as there were great range of sounds, we started people communicating and talking to each other. And we start to see the brain develop larger and larger at this time, till finally we see people able to use fire from lightning strikes to cook their own food. And this is what really starts to distinguish us from the animals, as we have this cooked food. Starts to help feed our giant growing brain and make us smarter, and it allows us to socialize more. And at this point here, we start to see in 1.3 million years, the vocal cords are moving up in the throat, allowing humans to speak in non-nasal tones to really accentuate our voice and allow us to really deepen and broaden our language. And it's really an important part because language is so central to our understanding of human culture. At this point, we're building society. At this time, we're in bands and groups of 150. And at this critical juncture, we see human society beginning to really define itself in very important ways. And shortly thereafter, we see advanced tool making. And these skills allow people to develop social organization even more. So in the Blombos Cave in Cape Town, South Africa, we see evidence of shape tools 164,000 years ago. And we also see the use of paint 100,000 years ago. Now, the paint here was not used or applied onto anything that has survived. We don't see it being put on the walls. We don't see it being put on some objects. So the assumption is the paint was used as a kind of body adornment. And that's probably where the first inklings of human ideas of art and art making came from, body adornment. Cave paintings found recently in Sulawesi, Indonesia in 2014 have really upended the whole theory of what we think of as art making in early human development. For a long time, people found the earliest and most advanced cave painting was in southern France and northern Spain. And people assumed that humans sort of moved into this region and developed these skills while they lived in Europe. But the problem with that theory has come with the Sulawesi discovery, because this is as old or older than anything found in Europe. And it indicates there must be an earlier point in human development where these traits, these ideas of art making were common, back in Africa especially, because this is a very early split in the human trail from Sulawesi, Indonesia on the east, and Europe in the west. We see that this very common themes and ideas in art making are already being explored. So this is where we see the development of human evolution, that in Africa, some long time in the past, probably tens of thousands of years earlier than this art, there was some kind of art being made in Africa. So let's look at the migration of humans out of Africa. We see Africa here turned upside down and pointing out of Africa, early split of humans moving to the east, to Southeast Asia, and Sulawesi would be on that trip, and then going out across Asia into Siberia, and then over the land bridge into the Americas. There's also possible movement from Europe across into the Americas, and then finally down into the South. So there's a lot of new discoveries that have been made on this genesis that is because of the use of DNA. And it's very important that we sort of look at this whole evolution as emerging initially in Africa, that every part of what it means to be human was first and fully developed and explored in Africa. It shaped us and who we are. And many cultures now have not only left Africa, but also come back. And we can see that in the record of the languages in Africa. Africa has a tremendous linguistic diversity. Not only are there languages which are very ancient, and we can see because of the sounds and the tones that they use that are completely unique to the African continent, that they are developed in a way they're not derived from any other source. They are original to Africa. So in these languages, we also see development and expansion of cultures that have come back into the region. This is especially evident in the Afro-Asiatic language in the north of Africa and the Malayo-Polynesian language in Madagascar, off the island of the east coast of Africa. And in these regions, you can start to see how African languages have kind of surrounded the older indigenous languages of Africa. So if we look at linguistic diversity across the world, it is surprising that the vast majority of linguistic diversity exists in Africa and Southeast Asia to some degree. And these are parts of the world which are very isolated. They're parts of the world where there's been very little migration, very little movement, because of the geography being so hostile and so adverse to human interaction. These are the places where pockets of ancient languages still exist. Another very important leap in human development, it was the discovery of agriculture and the way in which humans were able to harness foods and grow them their own and domesticate animals. And all of this really happened in what was called the Fertile Crescent. in the Central Asian, South and Middle Eastern region there, which is now called Iran. And this part of the world was very important for developing early cities, and advanced cooking and culinary experiences sort of grew out of here and then spread across the globe. These kinds of developments and discoveries did not happen in Africa because there were no indigenous domesticatable animals in Africa. There were no plants that you could domesticate. All of the plants that are currently domesticated in Africa have been brought in from the outside, and all have played a very important role in the development of human societies within Africa. And this is part of the sad truth of Africa even today. If we look at a map of human development in the modern world today, this map from 2006, that 34 of the 50 nations on the UN list of least developed countries are in Africa. In many nations, the gross domestic per capita income is less than $200 a year, with a vast majority of the population living on much less. And so this is part of the legacy of Africa, this very inhospitable and difficult continent has created very poor living conditions for humans. And though it is our place of origin, it is what and made us what we are. It was that the challenge of living there that really forged us into being human. And the problems of Africa continue apace, one of which has been the continuing spread of HIV infections. We can see from 2007 to 2011 that there has been significant improvement in especially North Africa, where there's been a very aggressive program to combat HIV. In the South, however, the matter has gotten much, much worse, as few people have really been able to take advantage of the medicines that are available because governments are hesitant to employ those resources. They don't believe that the vaccinations work or that the drug treatments are working. And so because of this anti-science prejudice, South Africa has really suffered in the last decade. And as AIDS and many other diseases in Africa, there's a kind of long, lingering suffering. It does not kill its victims outright, but requires an enormous amount of resources, as even the children of the victims become in need of great help and in search of stability. So we can see here in this the rise in orphanage across Africa, in South Africa especially, due to AIDS. Africa is in need of so many basic things that we often take for granted. Take, for example, just clean drinking water, safe drinking water. 40% of the people in Africa do not have access to safe drinking water. Many of them, as much as 50% in some, over than 50% in some places, struggle with such a basic necessity. It's calculated that providing safe drinking water in Africa would cost about as much as Americans spend on ice cream in 1 year. But it's more than that. It's not just, the lack of money. It's also the lack of political stability, the corruption, and other political and social and cultural problems which have isolated these African nations and created the desperate situations they have today. To understand these problems is to understand that Africa is a continent of great diversity and great adversity, and it's the home of some of the most extraordinary art in the world. Here is a review quiz. This is for your own practice so that you can see whether you've got the basic concepts of the lecture. To begin with, question 1. How much larger is the continent of Africa compared to the United States? What geological features are distinctive to the African continent? How long ago did humans evolve in Africa? What does the linguistic diversity of Africa say about human development? What kinds of economic and health challenges do people in Africa continue to struggle with?